Yo, what is up, guys? Welcome back to the Road to 1600 series here with Freddie Knows Ball. And today we are starting off with form, structure, and sense, part 1, okay? Form, structure, and sense is a bit of a complex question type. Not that it's really complicated, but there are just a lot of different things you could see. And I want to go over everything with you guys. So I'm splitting it up into 2 different videos just to make it easier to understand. But yeah, so the 3 sub question types within form, structure, and sense that we are covering today are going to be subject verb agreement, possessives, and pronouns. There's some crazy ball knowledge today. I'm super excited to share it with you guys, and we're just going to get right into it, all right? Let's start off with subject verb agreement. And so the first thing you want to do with subject verb agreement is find the subject. I know it sounds crazy. And then the second thing is find the verb that matches it. Well, I know what you're saying, Freddie. Obviously, you find the subject and you find the verb that agrees with it. But how do you do that? Well, guess what?
Ball knowledge.
Check it out, guys. On subject verb agreement questions, I have yet to see this not work on a question, okay? This technique called the he-they method, and you can use it to have a 100% accuracy on subject verb agreement questions, solving them in like 20 seconds max, all right? I'm gonna show it to you guys right now. Just bear with me. Let me show you an example so that I can put it into effect and explain to you guys what this actually is. Interest in mechanotransduction, the mechanism by which cells sense and convert. Yeah, no, guys, we don't need to read all that. Check it out. Which choice completes the text so it conforms to the conventions of standard English? We know it's standard English, and look what we see in the answer choices. A verb. And so what happens when we see that? This is subject-verb agreement. And check out the strategy, all right? The he-they method is essentially when you put he or they in front of the verb and see which one makes sense. If he makes sense, then the verb is singular. If they make sense, then the verb is plural. But that's not even the ball knowledge. That's only a part of it, all right? So let's try it out for this answer choice, and let's see what happens, okay? Let's use he. He is studying. Makes sense. He has studied. Makes sense. He study. Doesn't make sense. He studies. Makes sense. So 3 of the answer choices made sense, and 1 of them didn't. Guess which answer choice is correct? C, the one that didn't. So literally the odd one out in any subject-verb agreement question is always correct. And there's always an odd one out, unless it gets patched in the future after I'm making this video. College Board has not released a question that doesn't follow this formula. And so let's look at the next question just to really solidify this knowledge. Once again, we don't have to read the question. I'm going to give you guys a second to try to solve it on your own and see if you can integrate my strategy. Hopefully you guys have tried to solve it. Let's look at it together now. We see standard English convention. We see different forms of the verb in the answer choices. Boom, subject-verb agreement. Let's use they this time. They have been powering. Makes sense. They power. Makes sense. They powers. Doesn't make sense. They are powering. Makes sense. So 3 of them make sense and 1 of them doesn't. C doesn't make sense. C is the correct answer. That's literally the literal step-by-step, block-by-block, how to solve this question type. Literally a robot. I mean, obviously a robot. Literally, it's that simple, okay? 20 seconds max. Let's look at the next one because there are some hard difficulty ones here. And I'm just going to show you how they're really not hard at all. Standard English conventions. The answer choices have verbs in them. Let's use they again. They focuses. Doesn't make sense. They focus. Makes sense. They are focused. Makes sense. They were focused. Makes sense. Only 1 of them doesn't make sense, and it's A. Guess what the answer choice is? A. I want to still make sure that you guys know how to double check your answers just in case this method does get patched, although it is very unlikely. I don't want you guys just solely relying on this strategy and then losing points on your actual test because it didn't work. So let's look at the question and try to actually reason it out. 10 of Shakespeare's plays are classified as histories. Although each one of these plays, which include Henry V and Richard III, blank on a single historical figure. Some feature different episodes from the same life. So, notice how I skipped through some of the words in there. You want to look for non-essential information, and you essentially don't need it when you're solving these types of questions. So if you can skip over information to understand the passage with all the information that you need, but still save time, definitely do it. So let's read the sentence with the blank in it again. Although each one of these plays, which include Henry and Richard, blank on a single historical figure, blah, blah, blah. So, what is the subject here? You have to identify that the subject is one, or each one. When you see that although each one focuses on a single figure, that's what's so crucial about eliminating non-essential information, because a lot of people would have gotten this wrong, hence why it's a hard question, because they thought plays was the subject. But when you identify that each one is actually what the verb is agreeing with or matching with, that's how you understand conceptually that focuses is actually the correct answer. Let's move on. Conventions of Standard English, we see different forms of the verb in the answer choices. So, let's use they again. They is increasing. Doesn't make sense. They increase. Makes sense. They increases. Doesn't make sense. They has increased. Doesn't make sense. So, only one of them did make sense, and that's B. So, since the other three didn't make sense, they were not correct. Hopefully, you guys are understanding this. Whether you use he or they does not matter. It just matters whether 3 singular and 1 plural or 3 plural and 1 singular. You just have to find the one, and that one is your correct answer, all right? Let's move on to the next part of this question type. Possessives is essentially just where the apostrophe goes. And so for a lot of people who have English as their first language, this comes pretty easily, but there are still a couple tricky questions that can stump you. And so I want to practice a couple of these with you guys so that you guys can really understand how possessives show ownership, right? So a good way to demonstrate this apostrophe rule is using the word players. Let's say the players ran onto the field. The players aren't showing ownership to anything. That means that there's no apostrophe needed. Now let's say the player's jersey had a stain. Now the jersey belongs to the player. So you need an apostrophe before the S because it's only one player. So it's a singular possessive. Now if we say the player's bus was delayed and we're talking about multiple players, now it's a plural possessive. The apostrophe has to go after the S. Hopefully that makes sense. Let's dive into some practice questions that go over possessives. All right, so for this question, we've got standard English convention and we've got different apostrophe placements for terms precedence. Okay, so let's read through it. It can take time for proposed amendments to the U.S. Constitution to become law. For example, the 22nd Amendment, which limits the number of terms presidents can serve, was first proposed in 1947 and blah, blah, blah. So terms and presidents both do not show any possession. So we don't need any apostrophes here. The answer is obviously A. To identify that they don't need any apostrophes, you just have to see that there's no ownership. Once you identify that there's no ownership, you see that they don't need any apostrophes in this answer. And that's how you come to the conclusion that the answer is A. All right, I want you guys to try this one on your own. Pause the video and come back when you have an answer. Hopefully you guys got the answer. Let's go ahead and read through it. Standard English conventions, different placement for apostrophes. And we have a little bit of a bonus. There's its and there's their as different words in the answer choices. So let's read through it. French philosopher René doubted whether he could prove his own existence. Eventually, he found proof in his famous phrase, "I think, therefore I am." The phrase's simplicity masks its or their complexity. Only those who exist would be able to ponder their existence. All right, so immediately I'm thinking there's only one phrase. The apostrophe can't go after the S. This is singular. A has to be wrong. And B has to be wrong too, because the simplicity belongs to the phrase. the phrase shows possession, meaning it has to be either C or D because the apostrophe has to go before the S. Now, C says the phrase's simplicity masks their complexity, while D says the phrase's simplicity masks its complexity. Which one's right? Well, there's only one phrase, meaning that this is singular. Its is singular while there is plural. So since its is singular, it matches the fact that the phrase is singular, and so that's why D is correct here. Now for this question, the answer choices look a little bit different, but this is still a possessives question, okay? So let's read through it. In this person's sculpture, gone are the types of pop culture references that made the artist a star at the height of the pop art movement. In blank place is a far more personal subject. Okay, so we can see that what we're trying to talk about is the references. It's the pop culture references that are being replaced, right? Once you identify that, we know that's plural, so it has to be there because we just talked about last time that its is singular and there is plural. So we know it's there, but is it one with an apostrophe or without? Well, there's no possession here, so you can immediately eliminate B, and the correct answer is C. Now, for this question, we see standard English conventions, we see different apostrophes in the answer choices, and what's unique about this question and what makes it harder is that there's actually multiple places the apostrophes can go, which, that is pretty typical in the possessive questions, so it's good that we're getting familiar with it here. Let's read the question. To fully describe the motion of an object requires knowing each of 5 variables that characterize object's movement: displacement, time, initial velocity, final velocity, and acceleration. These are called kinematic variables. So, each of 5 variables that characterize object's movement. Variables has no possession here. We can immediately eliminate A because variables is not owning anything. Now, there are multiple objects and they do own the movement. So we know that objects has to have an apostrophe after the S, all right? The only question that does both of those things is B. Hopefully that makes sense to you guys. If not, this question is a little tricky. Go ahead and watch back my explanation if you need to. But if we're good there, let's move on to the next one. So the next subtopic within form, structure, and sense that we're going to talk about today, and the final one, is pronouns. So the strategy is just match the pronoun with the antecedent. And for those of you guys that don't remember what an antecedent is, it's essentially just the noun that comes after the pronoun that's connected to it, okay? And so we're just going to look at some practice questions. This is a relatively easy question type, so once you get the hang of it, you'll be good to go. Let's get into it. For this question, we see standard English conventions, and we see a couple different answer choices which have different forms of pronouns. So let's read the text. In 1930, this artist depicted the natural beauty of this park in 2 memorable woodcuts. In 2019, blank exhibited alongside 150 of the other works, blah, blah, blah. So we know that the blank is connected to the 2 memorable woodcuts, okay? So we know that that's plural. And so knowing that it's plural puts us in between B and D. They were and some were. To find out which one is correct, you really just have to think about the antecedent. So 2 memorable woodcuts. If I have 2 of something, let's say I have 2 rocks, okay? I threw some of them over the fence. Some of them, you only had 2. Why would you say some? Just say 1 or both. Or all, whatever. But essentially, that's the reason that some doesn't work here, is because knowing that you have 2 and then saying some doesn't align on the SAT. Let's move on to the next question about pronouns. All right, so we see conventions of standard English here, and then we see a bunch of different ways of saying accumulate. So let's go ahead and read the question. Official measurements of the river's length vary. According to the survey, the river is 2,300 miles long, whereas this agency records it as 2,320 miles long. This disparity can be explained in part by the fact that rivers such as the Mississippi expand and contract as blank sediment. So this one is tricky because you have to identify the antecedent. The antecedent is rivers. It's not the Mississippi. Such as the Mississippi is an example of the antecedent rivers. Now all you have to do is just find the answer choice that aligns with that. And so we look at the answer choices and we see A, they accumulate. That aligns perfectly because they is plural and accumulate is a plural verb. One accumulates doesn't make sense. It accumulates doesn't make sense. We also have D though, which says we accumulate. Now while that is plural, we're not talking about people. We're talking about the river. And so since we're talking about the river, A has to be the correct answer choice. Now let's look at this final question, guys. After this, you guys will have mastered part 1 of form, structure, and sense, all right? You guys can try this one on your own if you'd like. Go ahead and pause the video and come back when you have an answer. Now let's go ahead and solve it together. When a given industry carries high startup costs and other barriers, blank of just 1 or 2 suppliers per municipality. Such industries are known as natural monopolies. So we see that industry is the antecedent. Now, knowing that, we can narrow it down to 2 options. It often consists and this often consists. The reason that it is the correct answer, so C is the correct answer, is because it talks about a specific noun, while this talks about a whole situation. And this goes for all pronoun questions on the SAT, all right? It talks about a specific noun, while this talks about a whole situation. Since we're literally just talking about the industry, which is the noun, the answer is it. And so if you picked C, you were correct. And that's all I have for you guys today. I hope you enjoyed. I hope that ball knowledge transforms your standard English convention score, because I know it did transform mine. And I have more coming for you guys in the next video. We've got modifiers coming up. We've got a bunch more stuff that is super easy to game on the SAT. I hope you guys stick around for that, and I'll see you there. Peace.